Hey Vikings fans, buckle up because this one might hit harder than you expect. We're not just talking about one bad pick or one unlucky draft night. We're talking about a pattern that could explain years of frustration. And trust me, once you hear this, you might never look at draft night the same way again. There's a new perspective shaking up the conversation around the Minnesota Vikings, and it's not about talent. It's about decision-making under pressure. What if the real problem isn't who the Vikings are scouting, but how they react when things don't go according to plan? So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might start questioning everything you thought you knew about how this team builds its future, and more importantly, whether things are finally about to change. The conversation starts with something Vikings fans know all too well: missed draft picks. For years, we've heard the same explanations: bad luck, development issues, players not panning out. But now, there's a deeper theory gaining traction. Instead of blaming individual players, the focus is shifting to the process itself. And that's a much bigger deal. Because if the process is flawed, it doesn't matter how good your scouts are. You're setting yourself up to fail again and again. That's what makes this moment so important. This isn't about one mistake. It's about whether the Vikings have been making the same mistake over and over without even realizing it. Now here's where things get really interesting. Analysts are starting to argue that the Vikings' biggest issue is what happens when the draft board doesn't cooperate. When things get messy, when unexpected players fall, when plans get disrupted, that's when the cracks start to show. Instead of adapting, the criticism is that the Vikings have been sticking too rigidly to preset plans. Almost like they walk into the draft already decided on what they're going to do, no matter what unfolds in front of them. And in the NFL, that's dangerous. Because draft night is chaos. The best teams thrive in that chaos. The worst teams get exposed by it. Let's rewind to a moment that still frustrates a lot of fans: the 2022 draft. A highly talented player unexpectedly fell on the board, and it looked like a golden opportunity. But instead of taking advantage, the Vikings moved down. They stuck to their strategy. They followed the script. And they ended up with multiple players instead of grabbing the top-tier talent sitting right in front of them. Now, it's not just about hindsight. It's about the decision-making process. Were they reacting to value, or just executing a plan they had already locked in before the night even started? And that's the question that keeps coming back. Because great teams don't just scout well, they adjust well. They pivot. They react. They take advantage of opportunities when they appear. The concern here is that the Vikings may not have been doing that. Instead, they may have been operating with tunnel vision, locked into a path regardless of how the board changed. And if that's true, it explains a lot. It explains why certain opportunities slipped away. It explains why some picks felt forced. It explains why fans have been left wondering, why didn't we just take the obvious guy? But it gets even more intense. Because the second major criticism is about what happens when things go wrong. According to this perspective, when the Vikings get sniped, when another team jumps ahead and takes their target, the reaction hasn't always been calm or strategic. Instead, it can turn into panic. And panic in the draft is a killer. Think about it. You're on the clock. Your guy just got taken. The room gets tense. The phones start ringing. And suddenly, you're making decisions faster than you planned. That's when mistakes happen. The argument is that instead of resetting and reassessing, the Vikings may have rushed into backup plans that weren't as strong, reaching for players, making trades they didn't fully need to make. And when you combine rigid planning with panic reactions, you get inconsistency. You get uneven draft classes. You get results that don't match expectations. That's why this conversation feels different. This isn't about blaming one general manager or one coaching staff. It's about identifying a pattern that could span multiple years. And now there's hope that things might change. With leadership adjustments and evolving roles in the front office, there's a growing belief that the Vikings could shift toward a more flexible, best player available approach. That means staying open, trusting the board, letting the draft come to you instead of forcing it into a pre-built structure. And honestly, that's what fans have been begging for. Because at the end of the day, the draft is unpredictable. You can prepare all you want, but you have to be ready to adapt. You have to embrace the chaos, not fight it. And if the Vikings can finally do that, everything could change. There was even a recent example that really highlights this frustration. A team traded down from the late first round and picked up a future first-round pick in the process. Massive value. Meanwhile, the Vikings stayed put and filled an immediate need. Now, that's not necessarily wrong, but it raises the question, were there better options on the table? Could they have gained more long-term value by being flexible instead of sticking to a specific goal? That's the kind of what-if that keeps fans up at night. Because it's not just about who you pick. It's about what you could have done differently. What opportunities you might have missed by staying too rigid. And that's why this upcoming draft is so important. It's not just about the players. It's about the process. Fans will be watching closely, not just who gets selected, but how the decisions are made. Do the Vikings adapt when the board shifts? Do they take advantage of unexpected opportunities? Do they stay calm when things don't go their way? Or do we see the same patterns repeat? Because if we do, then we know the issue runs deeper than any single draft class. But if we don't, if we see flexibility, patience, and smarter reactions, then maybe, just maybe, this team is finally turning a corner. And that's what makes this moment so exciting and so nerve-wracking at the same time. So now I want to hear from you, Vikings fans. Do you think the real problem has been the draft process all along? Or is this criticism being blown out of proportion? What would you do differently if you were in that draft room? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get this debate going, because this is one of the biggest conversations surrounding the Minnesota Vikings right now. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with other Vikings fans. Let's keep growing this community and stay locked in for more Minnesota Vikings news and analysis. Skol! And let's take this even deeper, because if you really zoom out, this conversation about the Minnesota Vikings isn't just about draft night. It's about identity. What kind of team are the Vikings trying to be when it comes to building a roster? Are they a team that reacts in real time, attacking value wherever it appears? Or are they a team that walks in with a script and refuses to deviate from it, no matter how the board unfolds? That distinction matters more than anything, because in today's NFL, flexibility isn't optional. It's a competitive advantage. Think about the league's most successful teams. They don't just draft well, they maximize every situation. When a player unexpectedly falls, they pounce. When trade opportunities appear, they explore them. When chaos hits, they stay calm. That's the standard. And right now, the big question is whether the Minnesota Vikings are ready to operate at that level. Another layer to this discussion is how much influence different voices have inside the draft room. Because let's be real, draft decisions are rarely made by one person alone. You've got scouts, executives, coaches, all bringing their own perspectives. And sometimes that can lead to a balanced decision. But other times it can create hesitation, or worse, groupthink. There's been growing talk that previous structures may have leaned too heavily toward consensus, with strong influence from the coaching staff and immediate roster needs. And that's where things can get tricky. Because when you prioritize need over value, you start forcing picks. You start reaching. You start passing on elite talent because it doesn't fit your immediate plan. And over time, that adds up, creates gaps. It limits upside. And it keeps you stuck in a cycle of trying to fix short-term problems instead of building long-term strength. That's why some believe a shift toward a best player available mindset could be a game-changer for the Vikings. Imagine a draft where the team isn't chasing needs, but instead stacking talent, where they trust their board, stay patient, and let value come to them. That's how you build something sustainable. And let's be honest, that's what Vikings fans have been craving for years. Not just flashes of success, but a consistent pipeline of talent that keeps this team competitive every single season. Now here's where things get really exciting and a little uncomfortable. Because if the Vikings DO change their approach, it might not look the way fans expect. There could be moments where they pass on a popular pick. Moments where they trade down instead of up. Moments where they take a player at a position that doesn't seem like an immediate need. And in those moments, fans are going to have to trust the process. Because real change doesn't always feel comfortable at first. But if the process improves, if the decision-making becomes sharper, more flexible, more opportunistic, then the results will follow. That's the gamble. That's the hope. And that's why this next draft could be one of the most important in recent Minnesota Vikings history. Not because of one player, not because of one position, but because it could reveal whether this organization has learned from its past, or is doomed to repeat it. So as we get closer to draft night, keep your eyes on more than just the names being called. Watch the movement, watch the trades, watch how the Vikings react when things don't go according to plan. Because that's where the real story will be written. And if they get it right, we might be looking at the beginning of a whole new era in Minnesota. But if they don't, well, let's just say Vikings fans have seen that movie before. Now I've got one more question for you, one that really matters. If you had to choose, would you rather the Vikings draft for need and try to win now, or draft the best player available and build for long-term dominance? There's no easy answer, but your opinion says a lot about how you see the future of this team. Drop it in the comments right now. Let's get this conversation going. And don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with every Vikings fan you know. Because the Noticias dos Minnesota Vikings news are heating up, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Skol, Vikings Nation!